The morning sun cast long shadows across my front yard as I stepped outside with my coffee, expecting to start another peaceful Saturday. Instead, I froze in horror at what greeted me. Bright red spray paint covered the side of my white garage door, spelling out crude words I won't repeat. My carefully tended flower beds had been trampled, petunias and marigolds crushed into the dark soil. Worst of all, my car windshield was spider-webbed with cracks from what looked like thrown rocks. My hands shook as I set down my coffee mug on the front steps. This was the third time in 2 weeks that my property had been vandalized, and each incident was getting worse. This shocking tale will amaze you, so please support with a like and subscription. Tell me what part of the world you're from. My name is Elena Cruz, I'm 54 years old, and I've lived in this quiet suburban neighborhood for over 15 years. Never in all that time had I experienced anything like this. I'd worked hard to maintain my little corner of paradise, spending weekends painting trim and planting seasonal flowers. Now, someone was systematically destroying everything I'd built. "Mom, what happened out here?" My son David's voice startled me from behind. At 28, David Cruz still lived at home while saving money for his own place, and I was grateful for his presence during these troubling times. His dark hair was messy from sleep, but his brown eyes were instantly alert as he took in the damage. "Same person who's been doing this," I said, my voice tight with frustration. "But it's getting worse, David. Much worse." He walked around my Honda Civic, examining the windshield damage with growing anger. "Mom, this is going to cost hundreds to fix. We need to call the police again." "And tell them what? The same thing I told them last time? They'll just file another report and do nothing." I picked up a crushed marigold, its orange petals wilted and brown. "Officer Martinez was nice enough, but he basically told me these things happen with teenagers acting out." "You don't think it's kids from the high school?" I shook my head firmly. "David, I've taught teenagers for 22 years before I retired. When kids vandalize, it's random and sloppy. This feels different. Personal." As if summoned by our conversation, my next-door neighbor, Harold Brennan, emerged from his house wearing his usual weekend outfit of pressed khakis and a polo shirt. At 62, Harold maintained his property with military precision. Every blade of grass perfectly trimmed. Every hedge geometrically shaped. He'd moved in about 6 months ago after retiring from his job as a bank manager. "Elena! Oh my goodness, what happened here?" Harold's voice carried just the right note of concern as he approached our property line. His pale blue eyes surveyed the damage with what seemed like genuine shock. "This is terrible." "Absolutely terrible." "The same vandals struck again," I replied, watching his reaction carefully. Something about Harold had always seemed off to me, though I couldn't put my finger on exactly what. "You know, I was thinking about our conversation yesterday," Harold said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "About those teenagers from Riverside High who cut through our neighborhood. I saw a group of them hanging around the bus stop yesterday evening, and they were being quite loud and disrespectful." David frowned. "Did you see them actually do anything to Mom's property?" "Well, no, not directly," Harold admitted. "But who else could it be? These kids today have no respect for other people's belongings. When I was their age, we would never dream of destroying someone's hard work like this." I noticed how quickly Harold had steered the conversation toward blaming the teenagers, just like he had during our previous incidents. Each time my property was vandalized, Harold seemed to have a story about suspicious youth in the area, but never any concrete evidence. "Harold, did you hear anything last night? Any noise or commotion?" I asked. He shook his head solemnly. "I'm afraid I'm a sound sleeper, Elena. Once I take my evening medication, I don't wake up until morning. But I did notice that group of teenagers seemed particularly agitated yesterday. One of them was carrying a backpack that could have easily concealed spray paint cans. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from my friend and former teaching colleague, Patricia Hawkins. She lived 3 streets over, but had heard about my recent troubles through our tight-knit retired teachers network. Patricia's coming over, I told David after reading her message. She heard about what happened and wants to help. Within 10 minutes, Patricia's silver Subaru pulled into my driveway. At 57, Patricia Hawkins had the same no-nonsense energy that had made her an excellent high school principal for 15 years. Her short gray hair was perfectly styled despite the early hour, and she wore jeans and a college sweatshirt that suggested she'd dropped everything to rush over. "Elena, honey, this is getting out of hand," Patricia said as she surveyed the damage. Her green eyes flashed with anger behind her reading glasses. "Someone is targeting you specifically." Harold, who had been lingering near the property line, stepped closer. "I was just telling Elena that I suspect it's those teenagers from the high school. They've been causing trouble all over the neighborhood." Patricia turned to study Harold with the sharp gaze that had intimidated countless students over the years. "And you are?" "Harold Brennan, Elena's neighbor. I moved in about 6 months ago." He extended his hand with a practiced smile. "I've been trying to help Elena figure out who's responsible for these attacks." "Attacks?" Patricia repeated thoughtfully. "That's an interesting way to phrase it." "Most people would call this vandalism or mischief." "Well, yes, of course." Harold backpedaled slightly. "I just meant that Elena is clearly being targeted for some reason." David had been quietly examining the spray paint on the garage door. "Mom, come look at this. The way this paint was applied, whoever did it was tall enough to reach this high without a ladder. Most high school kids would need something to stand on." Harold quickly interjected. "Oh, kids today are much taller than they used to be, and they're quite resourceful when they want to cause trouble." Patricia raised an eyebrow. "Harold, you seem to know quite a bit about the habits of local teenagers. Do you spend a lot of time observing them?" "I'm simply concerned about the neighborhood," Harold replied, his tone becoming slightly defensive. "As a homeowner, I think it's important to stay aware of potential problems." I watched this exchange with growing suspicion. Patricia had always been skilled at reading people, and I could tell she was picking up on the same strange vibe from Harold that had been bothering me. "Elena, have you considered installing a security camera?" Patricia asked. "I know it seems like an expense, but if this continues, you'll need concrete evidence." "That's exactly what I suggested," Harold said enthusiastically. "Though I worry that might just provoke these kids into doing something worse. Sometimes it's better not to antagonize troublemakers." David looked puzzled. "But if we catch them on camera, we can stop this from happening again." "Theoretically, yes," Harold said. "But you have to consider the mindset of these young vandals. They might see a camera as a challenge, or they might retaliate against Elena in ways that could be dangerous." Patricia's expression had grown increasingly skeptical during Harold's speech. "That's an unusual perspective. In my experience, security measures typically deter bad behavior rather than encourage it." "Well, you would know better than I would," Harold conceded with a tight smile. "I just worry about Elena's safety." As Harold returned to his house, Patricia pulled me aside. "Elena, something about that man doesn't sit right with me. Have you noticed anything strange about his behavior since these incidents started?" I glanced toward Harold's perfectly maintained yard, then back at my own vandalized property. "He's always very helpful and concerned. But you're right, there's something that feels off." "What kind of off?" "He always has explanations for everything, but they're always about those poor teenagers. And he never seems to have actually witnessed anything himself, but he's full of theories about what happened and who did it. David overheard our conversation. Plus, don't you think it's weird that nothing ever happens to his property? His house is right next door, but somehow the vandals only target Mom's stuff. Patricia nodded grimly. That is quite a coincidence. Elena, I think you need to start paying very close attention to your neighbor's patterns. When does he leave the house? When does he come home? Does he have visitors? You think Harold is involved? I asked, though part of me had been wondering the same thing. I think we shouldn't eliminate any possibilities, Patricia replied carefully. These attacks are too targeted, too personal. Someone wants to make you feel unsafe and violated in your own home. As I looked around at the destruction of my peaceful Saturday morning, I realized that Patricia was absolutely right. This wasn't random teenage mischief. Someone had a specific agenda, and they wanted me to suffer. One small detail blew the whole thing open. That evening, after Patricia had gone home and David had retreated to his room to do homework, I found myself unable to shake the unsettling conversation from earlier. I kept replaying Harold's reactions, his carefully worded responses, and most troubling of all, his insistence that installing cameras would somehow make things worse. I was washing the dinner dishes when David came back downstairs, grabbing a glass of water from the refrigerator. He leaned against the counter, studying my face. You're still thinking about what Patricia said, aren't you? He asked. I can't stop thinking about it, I admitted, scrubbing a plate with more force than necessary. Your whole life, when something seems too convenient or too coincidental, what does that usually mean? That it's probably not a coincidence, David replied without hesitation. Mom, I've been thinking about this all afternoon. Remember when Harold first introduced himself after we moved in? He made such a big deal about how quiet and peaceful this neighborhood was. He kept emphasizing how nothing bad ever happened here. I set the plate in the drying rack and turned to face him fully. That's true. He did seem very invested in that image of the neighborhood. And then suddenly, right after we settled in and started feeling comfortable, all these problems began. David continued, his voice growing more animated as he worked through his thoughts. But they're not random problems. It's always stuff that makes you feel violated and unsafe, but never anything that would bring serious police attention. The realization hit me like a cold wave. David, you're absolutely right. Broken flower pots, graffiti on the fence, scattered trash. It's all designed to be upsetting and personal, but not serious enough to warrant a real investigation. Exactly. And Harold is always the first person on the scene with explanations and sympathy, but never any real solutions. I dried my hands on the dish towel, my mind racing. There's something else that's been bothering me. Every time he talks about these supposed teenagers, his descriptions are always vague. Kids from a few streets over, or, you know how teenagers are these days. But he never has specific details about actually seeing anyone. David nodded eagerly. Right. And today, when Patricia suggested cameras, he immediately tried to talk you out of it. What normal neighbor would do that? A neighbor who doesn't want his activities recorded, I said quietly. We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of our suspicions settling between us. Finally, David spoke again. So, what do? We can't exactly accuse him without proof. No, we can't, but we can start paying attention in ways we haven't before. I folded the dish towel carefully, trying to organize my thoughts. Patricia was right about tracking his patterns, and maybe we should start documenting things more carefully. Like what? Times when incidents happen, where Harold is when they occur, what his reactions are like. I paused, thinking. David, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Okay. Have you ever felt like Harold was watching our house? Not in an obvious way, but just a feeling you couldn't shake? David's expression grew serious. Actually, yeah. Sometimes when I'm coming home from school, I'll see his curtains move right when I'm walking up our driveway. And a few times, when I've been in my room doing homework, I've looked out the window and seen him in his yard. But he always seems to be looking toward our house instead of actually doing yard work. Why didn't you mention this before? I thought I was being paranoid. I mean, he's always so nice and helpful when he talks to us. I figured I was just being weird about having a new neighbor. I reached out and squeezed David's shoulder. You weren't being weird. Your instincts were trying to tell you something important. So what's his deal? Why would he want to mess with us? I don't know yet, but people who do things like this usually have reasons that make sense to them, even if they seem crazy to everyone else. I glanced toward the window that faced Harold's house, though the curtains were drawn. Maybe he doesn't like new neighbors. Maybe he preferred when this house was empty. Maybe there's something about us specifically that bothers him. That's really messed up. It is, but at least now we're asking the right questions instead of just reacting to whatever happens next. David finished his water and set the glass in the sink. Should we tell Patricia what we're thinking? Definitely. She's got good instincts, and she's not emotionally involved like we are. She might see things we're missing. And should we still get those cameras? I considered this carefully. Yes, but we need to be smart about it. If Harold is behind this, we don't want him to know we suspect him. We need to act like we're still convinced it's teenagers. So we keep treating him like the helpful, concerned neighbor while we're actually watching him? Exactly. And David, this stays between us, Patricia, and whatever we can actually prove. We can't let anyone else know what we're thinking until we're absolutely certain. David nodded solemnly. I understand. As I turned off the kitchen lights and we headed upstairs, I felt a strange mixture of fear and relief. The fear was obvious, discovering that someone had been deliberately targeting our family, making us feel unsafe in our own home, was terrifying. But the relief was unexpected and powerful. After weeks of feeling confused and victimized by random events, we finally had a direction for our suspicions. I was settling into bed when my phone buzzed with a text message. The number wasn't in my contacts, but the message made my blood run cold. Stop looking into things that don't concern you, or the teenagers might get more creative with their pranks. I stared at the phone screen, my hands trembling slightly as I read the message again. The words seemed to burn into my vision. Stop looking into things that don't concern you, or the teenagers might get more creative with their pranks. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in the quiet bedroom. This wasn't random vandalism anymore. Someone was watching us closely enough to know we were investigating. Someone knew we were asking questions. I screenshot the message before it could somehow disappear, then sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process what this meant. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. David and I had just finished talking through our suspicions about Harold, and within an hour, I received a threatening text. Sleep was impossible. I kept checking the locks on the doors, peering through the curtains at Harold's dark house next door. Every small sound made me jump. When morning finally came, I felt exhausted and on edge. David was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs, and one look at my face told him something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked immediately, setting down his cereal spoon. I showed him the text message. His face went pale as he read it. "Mom, this is really scary. How did they get your phone number?" "I don't know. But David, Think about what this message is telling us. Whoever sent this wants us to believe it's still teenagers, but they're threatening us to stop investigating. If it really was just random kids vandalizing our property, why would they care if we looked into it? David nodded slowly. Because it's not random kids. And whoever is doing this knows we're getting close to figuring it out. Exactly. The question is, how do they know what we discussed last night? Were they somehow listening to our conversation, or are they just assuming we'd start investigating after what happened yesterday? That's a terrifying thought. David pushed his cereal away, apparently having lost his appetite. Should we call Patricia? Yes, but not from here. I want to meet her somewhere else, somewhere we can talk without worrying about who might be listening. An hour later, we met Patricia at a small coffee shop across town. She took one look at both of us and immediately knew something serious had happened. You both look like you didn't sleep at all, she said, sliding into the booth across from us. What's going on? I showed her the text message first, watching her expression grow increasingly concerned as she read it. This changes everything, she said quietly. This isn't vandalism anymore. This is harassment and intimidation. That's what we thought too, David said. But Mom and I talked yesterday, and we think we might know who's behind it. Patricia leaned forward. Tell me. I explained our suspicions about Harold, including David's observations about the man's behavior and the convenient timing of his helpfulness. Patricia listened without interrupting, but I could see her mind working through the implications. It does fit the pattern, she said when I finished. He's inserting himself into your situation, positioning himself as the helpful neighbor, while potentially being the one causing the problems. It's actually a pretty classic manipulation tactic. But why would he want to mess with us? David asked. We've never done anything to him. Patricia considered this. Sometimes people like this don't need a rational reason. Maybe he doesn't like change in the neighborhood. Maybe he preferred having an empty house next to his. Maybe there's something about your family specifically that triggers some kind of resentment or jealousy. Or maybe he's just someone who enjoys having control over other people, I added. Making us feel scared and confused while presenting himself as our ally could give him a sense of power. The timing of this text message is what really concerns me, Patricia said, tapping her phone screen. How did whoever sent this know you were investigating? Did you discuss your suspicions anywhere Harold might have overheard? We were in our kitchen, David said, with the windows closed. But what about your yard yesterday when you were looking at the damage? Patricia asked. Did you say anything then that might have indicated you were starting to suspect it wasn't random teenagers? I thought back to our conversation in the backyard. We might have. I can't remember exactly what we said, but if Harold was watching from his window or yard, he could have overheard something. Or, Patricia said grimly, he might have other ways of monitoring what you're doing. Some people who engage in this kind of behavior become very invested in watching their targets. David shuddered. You mean like spying on us? It's possible. The point is, we need to assume that anything you say or do at home might be observed or overheard. From now on, any discussions about this situation need to happen away from your house. I felt a chill run down my spine. The thought that Harold might be watching our house, monitoring our conversations, maybe even following our routines, made me feel violated in a way that went beyond the property damage. So, what do we do now? I asked. This text message feels like a direct threat. We document everything, and we're very careful about how we proceed, Patricia said. But we don't stop investigating. People who send threatening messages like this are usually trying to scare you away from something they're afraid you'll discover. The fact that someone is this desperate to stop you from looking into the situation tells me you're on the right track. But what if they follow through on their threat? David asked. What if the vandalism gets worse? Patricia reached across the table and squeezed his hand. We're going to be smart about this. We're going to gather evidence carefully and safely. And we're going to make sure you both stay protected while we figure out exactly what's going on. I looked around the coffee shop, suddenly paranoid that someone might be watching us even here. Patricia, there's something else that's been bothering me. The timing of when Harold moved in, right before our problem started. What if that's not a coincidence? What do you mean? She asked. What if Harold specifically chose to live next to us for a reason? What if this whole thing was planned from the beginning? The silence that followed my question was heavy with implications. If I was right, then we weren't dealing with a neighbor who had gradually developed a problem with us. We were dealing with someone who had deliberately positioned themselves to target our family. Patricia's phone suddenly buzzed with an incoming text, and all three of us jumped at the sound. Patricia glanced down at her phone, and I watched the color drain from her face. Her hand trembled slightly as she set the device back on the table. What is it? I asked, though part of me already knew I didn't want to hear the answer. She looked around the coffee shop nervously before leaning in closer. It's a text from an unknown number. It says, "Tell your friends to mind their own business too." David's coffee cup clattered against the saucer as he set it down too quickly. They're watching us right now, aren't they? The realization hit all three of us at the same time. Someone had seen us enter this coffee shop together. Someone had connected Patricia to our situation quickly enough to send that message while we were still sitting here. I felt my chest tighten with anxiety. Patricia, I'm so sorry. I never meant to drag you into this. Don't apologize, she said firmly, though I could hear the strain in her voice. But we need to be smarter about how we handle this from now on. The warm, cozy atmosphere of the coffee shop suddenly felt oppressive. The elderly man reading his newspaper in the corner, the young mother with her toddler by the window, the barista wiping down tables. Any of them could be watching us, reporting back to whoever was orchestrating this harassment. We should leave, David said quietly, but not together. Maybe we should meet somewhere else later? Patricia shook her head. No more meetings in public places. If someone is following you, tracking who you talk to, then we need to assume they're prepared to escalate this beyond simple property damage. I thought about Harold next door, probably peering through his curtains right now, wondering where we'd gone. The idea that he might have been planning this from the moment he moved in made my skin crawl. But if it wasn't Harold, if it was someone else entirely, that was somehow even more terrifying. There has to be a way to figure out who's doing this, I said. The text messages are evidence, right? Can't we trace them somehow? Possibly, Patricia said. But that would require involving law enforcement, and you said the police weren't particularly helpful before. David leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair. I keep thinking about what you said earlier, about Harold maybe not being a coincidence. What if we looked into his background, found out why he really moved to our street? That's not a bad idea, Patricia agreed. But we'd need to be very careful about how we do it. If he is involved, and he realizes we're investigating him specifically, things could get much worse. I watched the steam rise from my untouched latte, my appetite completely gone. I just want our normal life back. I want to be able to work in my garden without wondering if someone's going to destroy it overnight. I want David to be able to leave for work without worrying about what he'll come home to. I know, Patricia said softly. And we're going to get that back for you. But first, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. The bell above the coffee shop door chimed, and all three of us instinctively looked up. A man in a baseball cap entered, keeping his head down as he approached the counter. He was too far away for me to make out his features clearly, but something about his posture seemed deliberately casual, as if he was trying too hard to appear normal. Patricia noticed my stare and followed my gaze. "Do you recognize him?" "I'm not sure," I whispered. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just being paranoid now." The man ordered his coffee and found a seat with a clear view of our table. He pulled out his phone immediately, and I felt my heart rate spike. David's phone buzzed. We all stared at it for a long moment before David slowly reached for it. His face went pale as he read the message. "What does it say?" I asked. David's voice was barely audible. "It says, 'Last warning. Drop it, or next time it won't just be your property that gets damaged.'" The blood drained from my face as I stared at David's phone. The man in the baseball cap hadn't looked up from his own device, but the timing felt too coincidental to ignore. "We need to leave," Patricia whispered, her voice tight with urgency. "Right now." David was already standing, his chair scraping against the floor. "Sarah, come on." I grabbed my purse with shaking hands, my eyes still fixed on the stranger. As we hurried toward the exit, I caught a glimpse of his profile. He was younger than I'd initially thought, maybe late 20s, with a thin face and sharp jawline. Definitely not Harold, but that didn't make me feel any safer. The cool air hit us as we stepped outside, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. David's arm wrapped around my shoulders, pulling me close as we walked quickly to our car. "Did you see his face clearly?" Patricia asked as she unlocked her own vehicle parked beside ours. "Well enough," I replied, my voice shaky. "I've never seen him before, I'm sure of that." "But David, how did he know we were there? How did he know to send that message at exactly that moment?" David's jaw was clenched tight as he opened the passenger door for me. "Either he followed us, or someone's been watching our house and saw us leave," Patricia finished grimly. "Which means this is definitely more organized than we thought." I slumped into the passenger seat, the full weight of our situation hitting me. "This isn't just about property damage anymore, is it? They're threatening us directly now." "The message was pretty clear," David said as he started the engine. "But that also means we're getting close to something they don't want us to find. People don't escalate like this unless they're scared." Patricia leaned down to speak through David's open window. "I think we need to regroup. Maybe go to my place instead of yours, just in case anyone's watching your house." The drive to Patricia's apartment felt endless. Every car behind us seemed suspicious, every turn potentially dangerous. I kept checking the side mirror, looking for the man from the coffee shop, but the late afternoon traffic made it impossible to tell if we were being followed. Patricia's apartment was in a newer complex across town, the kind with security gates and well-lit parking areas. As we climbed the stairs to her second-floor unit, I felt some of the tension in my shoulders ease. "Okay," Patricia said once we were inside, deadbolting the door behind us. "Let's think this through logically. Someone knew exactly where we were and when to send that message. That suggests they've been watching you for a while." I sank onto her couch, suddenly exhausted. "But why? What could they possibly want from us? We're not wealthy. We don't have enemies. We're just ordinary people." "Maybe that's exactly why you were chosen," Patricia said, settling into the chair across from me. "Think about it. If someone needed a scapegoat or wanted to test out some kind of harassment campaign, they'd pick someone who seems unlikely to fight back effectively." David paced to the window, carefully peering through the blinds. The timing of Harold's arrival still bothers me. It can't be a coincidence that this all started right after he moved in. But the man at the coffee shop wasn't Harold, I pointed out. So either Harold's working with someone else, or we've been completely wrong about him from the beginning. The room fell quiet as we each wrestled with the implications. I thought about all the assumptions we'd made, all the theories we'd constructed around our strange neighbor. What if Harold really was just an eccentric old man who happened to have bad timing? There's something else, I said slowly. The teenagers Harold blamed? What if they're not random kids from the neighborhood? What if they're connected to whoever's really doing this? Patricia's eyes sharpened. You mean, what if Harold isn't the mastermind, but he's still involved somehow?
Maybe he was told to point suspicion toward specific kids? Or maybe he genuinely believes they're responsible because someone set it up to look that way, David added, turning from the window. Think about it. If you wanted to create confusion and misdirect blame, having a neighbor witness fake evidence would be perfect. My phone buzzed, and we all froze. With trembling fingers, I checked the screen. It was a text from an unknown number, but not the same one that had been messaging David. The message was short and chilling. Your friend can't protect you. Go home and stay there. Patricia read over my shoulder, her face grim. They know we're here. Somehow, they know exactly where we are. The realization hit me like a physical blow. We weren't just being harassed anymore. We were being hunted. And whoever was doing this had resources and organization far beyond what any of us had imagined. David's phone rang, the sound sharp and jarring in the tense silence. We all stared at it as it continued to ring, Harold's name flashing on the display. David stared at his phone as Harold's name continued flashing on the screen. The three of us exchanged glances, none of us sure what to do. The timing felt too convenient, too calculated. Answer it, Patricia whispered. We need to know what he wants. David hesitated for another ring, then swiped to accept the call. Hello? He listened for a moment, his expression growing increasingly puzzled. Harold, slow down. What are you talking about? Another pause. No, we're not at home right now. Why? I felt my stomach drop. Patricia moved closer so she could hear better. You saw what? David's voice sharpened. When did this happen? He looked at me with concern. Harold, are you sure about what you're telling me? The conversation continued for several more minutes, with David asking short questions and growing more agitated with each response. Finally, he said, We'll be there soon, and hung up. What did he say? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. David ran his hand through his hair. According to Harold, someone just broke into our house. He says he saw a man in dark clothes go around to the backyard about 20 minutes ago, then come out the front door like he owned the place. 20 minutes ago? Patricia checked her watch. That's right after you got that text telling you to go home. The pieces were starting to form a terrifying picture. Someone had wanted us out of the house. The text hadn't been a threat to keep us away. It had been reverse psychology, designed to make us want to stay away while they had free access to our home. Harold says he called out to the guy, but he just got in a car and drove off. David continued. He couldn't see the license plate, but he got a good look at the man's face. Says it was definitely the same person he's seen around the neighborhood before, lurking near the teenagers. I felt a chill run down my spine. So Harold has seen this person before? Why didn't he mention that when we talked to him about the vandalism? Maybe because we never really gave him the chance, Patricia said quietly. We were so focused on whether he was telling the truth about the teenagers that we didn't ask the right questions about what else he might have observed. David was already grabbing his keys. We need to get home and see what kind of damage we're dealing with. And we need to have a real conversation with Harold about everything he's seen. As we headed for the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into exactly the situation someone wanted us in. But staying away felt even more dangerous now. Our home had been violated, and we needed to understand why. The drive back felt endless, even though it only took 10 minutes. Harold was waiting on his front porch when we pulled into our driveway, and he hurried over before we'd even gotten out of the car. "I should have called sooner," he said, clearly agitated. "But I wanted to make sure he was really gone before I reached out. I didn't want to put you in danger if he was still around." Looking at Harold now, with genuine concern etched on his weathered face, I felt ashamed of how quickly we'd suspected him. This was not the behavior of someone orchestrating a campaign of harassment. "Tell us exactly what you saw," Patricia said, taking charge of the questioning. "Start from the beginning, and don't leave out any details, even if they seem unimportant." Harold nodded, gathering his thoughts. "I was in my kitchen making lunch when I heard a car door slam. Not unusual, but something made me look out the window. There was a dark sedan parked about 3 houses down, and I saw a man walking toward your backyard." "Can you describe him?" David asked. "Medium height, dark hair, probably in his 30s. He was wearing all black jeans, black jacket. But what struck me was how he moved. He wasn't trying to hide exactly, but he was being very deliberate about staying close to the fence line." Harold continued his account, describing how the man had disappeared into our backyard for about 15 minutes before emerging from our front door. The casual way he'd walked back to his car suggested someone who felt completely confident he wouldn't be challenged. "Harold," I said carefully, "you mentioned this was the same person you'd seen with the teenagers before. When was that, and what exactly did you observe?" His face darkened. "That's what I've been trying to figure out how to tell you. I think those kids might be in trouble." The words hung in the air like a physical weight. My stomach dropped as I processed what Harold was implying. The teenagers we'd been so quick to blame might actually be victims in whatever twisted game was being played with our lives. "What kind of trouble?" David asked, though his tone suggested he was dreading the answer. Harold rubbed his forehead, clearly struggling with how much to reveal. "About 2 weeks ago, I saw that same man talking to 3 teenagers near the bus stop on Maple Street. At first, I thought maybe he was asking for directions or something innocent like that, but their body language was all wrong. I found myself leaning forward, hanging on every word. The knot in my chest was tightening with each detail Harold provided. The kids looked scared," Harold continued. "Not just uncomfortable, but genuinely frightened. The man was standing too close, and he had his phone out like he was showing them something on the screen. One of the girls kept shaking her head and backing away, but he followed her." Patricia's face had gone pale. "Did you intervene?" "I started walking toward them, but as soon as the man noticed me approaching, he got in his car and drove off. The teenagers scattered in different directions before I could reach them." Harold's voice carried the weight of regret. "I should have called the police then, but I didn't have anything concrete to report. Just a feeling that something wasn't right. My mind was racing, trying to piece together the implications. If this man was somehow coercing or threatening local teenagers, then everything we'd assumed about our situation was completely wrong." The vandalism, the timing, Harold's observations, it all took on a sinister new dimension. "Harold," I said slowly, "when you saw this man at our house today, did he seem to know you were watching him?" Harold's expression grew troubled. "That's what's been bothering me. Right before he got to his car, he looked directly at my kitchen window. Not like he was casually glancing around,
but like he knew exactly where I'd be standing. And he smiled. David swore under his breath. This isn't random vandalism. Someone's been watching all of us, learning our routines, figuring out how to manipulate the situation. The violation I felt was deeper now than just having our property damaged. Someone had been studying our lives, using our home as part of some larger scheme that potentially involved threatening children. The thought made me physically sick. Patricia was pacing now, her analytical mind clearly working through the connections. If he's using teenagers to vandalize properties, possibly through blackmail or coercion, then he's escalated to doing it himself. The question is why. Maybe the kids refused to continue, I suggested. Or maybe they were getting too scared to keep going along with whatever he was forcing them to do. Harold nodded grimly. That would explain why I haven't seen those particular teenagers around the neighborhood lately. I used to see them at the bus stop every few days, but it's been over a week now. The implications were staggering. We weren't just dealing with property crime anymore. We were potentially witnesses to something much more serious, and the man responsible knew we were getting close to the truth. David looked at our house, then back at Harold. We need to see what he did inside, but I'm starting to think we shouldn't go in there alone. I understood his caution, but the thought of our home sitting there violated and unexplored was unbearable. We can't just stand here speculating. Whatever message he left, whatever damage he's done, we need to face it. Patricia stepped closer to me, her presence steadying. Then we go in together, and we document everything. But David's right. We need to be smart about this. Harold cleared his throat. There's something else you should know. After he left, I wrote down his license plate number. The weight of Harold's words hit us like a physical blow. A license plate number meant we had something concrete, something that could lead to real answers about who was terrorizing not just us, but potentially vulnerable teenagers in our community. Harold, you brilliant man, Patricia breathed, and I could see the relief washing over her face. For the first time since this nightmare began, we had actual evidence instead of just theories and fear. David ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from our childhood whenever he was processing something overwhelming. This changes everything. We're not just dealing with random vandalism anymore. We have a lead. I felt a strange mix of vindication and dread. Part of me was grateful that we finally had proof this wasn't our imagination, but another part was terrified of what we might discover about the scope of this man's actions. The thought that he might be coercing teenagers made my stomach turn. I wrote it on the back of my grocery receipt, Harold continued, pulling a crumpled piece of paper from his jacket pocket. I've been carrying it around since it happened, trying to decide what to do with it. Patricia took the paper with steady hands, though I could see the slight tremor in her fingers. She'd been my anchor through all of this, but I was learning that her calm exterior masked deep currents of worry. Watching her now, I realized how much she'd been holding back her own fears to help me stay strong. We need to look inside the house first, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. Whatever he did in there, whatever message he left, we need to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with before we decide our next move. David stepped closer to me, and I was struck by how much our relationship had evolved over the past few weeks. The protective big brother who used to dismiss my concerns was gone, replaced by someone who truly listened and took my fears seriously. Are you sure you're ready for this, Sarah? Whatever's in there, it's not going to be pleasant. The question hung in the air, and I realized this was about more than just walking into our violated home. David was asking if I was ready to face the full reality of how vulnerable we'd been, how completely this stranger had invaded our sense of security. I need to see it, I said firmly. I've spent weeks feeling helpless and scared. I can't heal from this until I know exactly what we're dealing with. Patricia nodded approvingly, and I caught a glimpse of pride in her expression. She'd been encouraging me to find my strength throughout this ordeal, and I was finally beginning to understand what she meant. Fear was still there, but it was tempered now by determination and anger. Harold folded his arms across his chest, his weathered face set with resolve. Then we go in together. 4 sets of eyes are better than 1, and if there's anything dangerous in there, we'll spot it faster as a group. As we approached my front door, I noticed details I'd missed in my initial panic. The lock showed scratches around the keyhole, suggesting he'd taken time to work on it rather than simply breaking in. The methodical nature of it was somehow more unsettling than if he'd just smashed a window. He wanted to leave everything looking normal from the outside, Patricia observed, running her finger along the scratched metal. Someone walking by wouldn't notice anything wrong. David tried the handle, and the door swung open easily. He didn't even bother locking it when he left. That's either arrogance or another message. The smell hit us first. It wasn't the familiar scent of our home, but something else. Something foreign and wrong. Not exactly unpleasant, but distinctly other, like cologne or cigarettes, marking his presence in our private space. Stay close together, I said, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to protect or comfort. Maybe all of us. The living room looked untouched at first glance, but as we moved deeper into the house, the violations became apparent. Picture frames had been turned face down. Drawers were opened just slightly, enough to show they'd been searched, but not enough to look obviously disturbed from a distance. This isn't random destruction, Harold said grimly. He was looking for something specific, or trying to send a very particular message. Patricia stopped in the hallway, her face pale. Sarah, look at this. On the wall where our family photos usually hung, someone had rearranged them. Pictures of David and me from childhood, photos of family gatherings, images that represented our history and connections, had been organized in a deliberate pattern. They formed an arrow pointing toward the back bedroom. He knows who we are, David said quietly. He studied our family, our relationships. This isn't just about the house or the property. He's making this personal. The realization that this stranger had spent time examining intimate moments from our lives, learning about our bonds and vulnerabilities, made me feel more violated than any amount of property damage could have. He'd turned our own memories into tools for intimidation. Whatever he wants us to see is in that bedroom, I said, following the arrow's direction with my eyes. The question is whether we're walking into a trap or just another layer of his psychological game. Harold stepped between us and the bedroom door, his protective instincts clearly activated. Before we go any further, I need to ask you something. Are you all prepared for the possibility that what we find in there might change how we see this entire situation? The question hung heavy in the air, and I realized we were standing at a crossroads. Whatever lay behind that bedroom door would determine not just our next steps, but potentially the safety of other people in our community. As I reached for the door handle, a sound from outside made us all freeze. The distinctive rumble of a car engine, slowing down as it approached our street. The car engine grew louder, then stopped directly in front of our house. Through the front window, we could see headlights illuminating our driveway in the growing dusk. It's him, Patricia whispered, her voice barely audible.
He's come back to watch us discover whatever he left. David moved to the window, staying carefully to the side to avoid being seen. It's a dark sedan, but I can't make out the license plate from this angle. The driver is just sitting there. Harold put his hand on my shoulder. Sarah, we need to make a choice right now. Do we confront this head on, or do we call this in and wait for help? The weight of the decision pressed down on me, but something had shifted in the last few minutes. Standing here with my brother, my friend, and Harold, I realized that our neighbor hadn't just been targeting our property. He'd been trying to isolate us, make us feel vulnerable and alone. But we weren't alone. We're going to see what's in that bedroom, I said firmly. Together, all of us. Whatever game he's playing, whatever message he thinks he's sending, we're not going to let fear stop us from understanding what we're dealing with. The car engine remained idle outside, a constant reminder of the presence watching us. I turned the bedroom door handle, and it opened easily. Too easily. He'd wanted us to find this. The bedroom had been transformed into something resembling a command center. Papers covered the bed, walls, and dresser. Photos of our daily routines, our comings and goings. Detailed notes about our schedules, our habits, our relationships with each other. But more disturbing were the documents scattered across the bed. These are property records, Harold said, picking up one of the papers. Not just for this house, but for half the neighborhood. And look at this. He held up a thick folder. Planning permits, zoning applications, development proposals. David was studying a large map taped to the wall. Sarah, this whole area is marked for some kind of development project. Your property, the Martinez house next door, the 3 houses across the street, they're all outlined in red. Patricia found a stack of letters on the dresser. These are correspondence between someone and a development company. They're talking about acquiring properties for a shopping complex. But look at the dates. These negotiations have been going on for 2 years. The pieces started falling into place with sickening clarity. He's not just our neighbor, I said slowly. He's been placed here deliberately. The vandalism, the intimidation, the harassment, it's all been designed to make us want to sell and leave. Harold examined more of the documents. According to these papers, every property owner in this section has been approached with purchase offers except you. You're the holdout, Sarah, the one property they need to make their development plan work. Outside, the car engine revved once, then twice, a signal or a warning. But why go through all this elaborate psychological warfare? David asked. Why not just make us a reasonable offer? I thought about the months of escalating harassment, the careful way our neighbor had tried to make us look paranoid and unreasonable. Because they needed us to look like the problem. If word got out that developers were pressuring longtime residents to sell through intimidation tactics, it could derail their whole project. Patricia was reading through more letters. Sarah, there's something else here. These documents mention other neighborhoods, other problem properties where similar strategies were used. We're not the first family they've targeted this way. The realization that our neighbor's campaign against us was part of a larger calculated business strategy made me angrier than all the vandalism combined. We weren't just dealing with one unstable individual. We were up against an organized effort to drive us from our home. So, what now? David asked. We have evidence of what they're doing, but we're still trapped in our house with their agent sitting outside. Harold was already moving toward the window. Now we turn the tables. They've been watching us, studying our reactions, trying to predict our behavior. But they made one critical mistake. What's that? I asked. They assumed we'd be too scared or too isolated to fight back effectively. They didn't count on us working together,
or on us being smart enough to piece together their real agenda. The car outside honked once, a sharp, demanding sound. "He wants us to know he's there," Patricia said. "He wants us to feel trapped and helpless." But I was feeling something entirely different now. The fear was still there, but it was being overtaken by a fierce determination. This wasn't just about our property anymore. It was about protecting other families from going through what we'd experienced. "We're not giving him what he wants," I said. "We're not going to run, and we're not going to hide. But we're also not going to confront him directly while he has the advantage." David looked at me with growing respect. "What are you thinking, Sarah?" I was thinking about all the evidence scattered around us, about the pattern of harassment that suddenly made perfect sense, about the other families who had probably been driven from their homes by similar tactics. I'm thinking we need to get this evidence somewhere safe, and then we need to make some strategic decisions about how to expose what's really been happening here. Outside, the car door slammed shut. Through the window, we could see a figure walking deliberately toward our front door. "Looks like he's tired of waiting," Harold said grimly. "He's coming to us." The heavy footsteps on our porch made us all freeze. Through the window, I could see the man's shadow blocking the light from the street lamp. He knocked once, then twice, each rap deliberate and threatening. "Nobody move," I whispered. Though my heart was hammering so loud, I was sure he could hear it through the door. David had gone completely pale, but he positioned himself between the door and the rest of us. "Mom, what if he tries to break in?" "He won't," Harold said quietly, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "Too many witnesses if he escalates to that level. This is still about intimidation." Patricia was carefully gathering the scattered documents, her hands shaking slightly as she tried to organize them. "Sarah, we need to get these somewhere safe. If something happens to us, this evidence needs to survive." The knocking came again, more insistent this time. "I know you're in there," a muffled voice called through the door. "We need to talk about your situation." The casual way he said, "your situation," made my skin crawl. Like our terror was just another business transaction to him. David started toward the door, but I grabbed his arm. "Don't you dare," I said. "We're not playing his game." "But Mom, maybe if we just listen to what he has to say." "No." The word came out sharper than I intended, but I needed him to understand. This man has been systematically terrorizing our family for months. He's destroyed our peace of mind, our sense of security in our own home. We don't owe him a conversation. Harold nodded approvingly. "Your mother's right, David. Men like this count on our politeness, our instinct to be reasonable even when they've shown us no respect." Patricia looked up from the documents. "David, I understand wanting to resolve this peacefully, but look at what we've found here. This isn't about resolving anything. It's about forcing us out of our home so someone else can profit." The knocking stopped, and we heard footsteps moving around to the side of the house. I realized he was checking the windows, looking for another way to make contact or simply to unnerve us further. "He's circling the house," I said, trying to keep my voice steady for David's sake. David's jaw tightened. "This is insane. Why should we be prisoners in our own home?" "We're not prisoners," I said, though the words felt hollow. "We're making a strategic choice to engage on our terms, not his." Harold was peering through the curtains. "He's back at the front door." More knocking, followed by the man's voice again. "Mrs. Johnson, I know you've been having problems with vandalism in the neighborhood. I'm here to help you understand your options." The fake concern in his voice was almost worse than outright threats would have been. Patricia made a disgusted sound. He's still pretending this is about helping us, she said. Even now, with all the evidence of what he's really been doing. David looked between all of us, and I could see him processing everything we'd discovered. So he's been the one vandalizing our property this whole time, and now he's offering to help us with the vandalism problem he created? Exactly, Harold said. It's a classic manipulation tactic. Create the problem, then present yourself as the solution. I felt a surge of pride watching David work through the situation. A few hours ago, he'd been ready to blame random teenagers, accepting the easy explanation. Now, he was seeing the larger pattern, understanding how we'd all been manipulated. Mrs. Johnson? The voice came again. I understand you've been under a lot of stress. These situations can be resolved much more easily when everyone cooperates. The implied threat in those words was unmistakable. Patricia stood up, holding the organized stack of documents. Sarah, I think we should document this interaction too. If he's making veiled threats, we need a record of it. You're right, I said, pulling out my phone. David, can you write down exactly what he's saying and what time he's saying it? David nodded, grabbing a notebook. Already on it, Mom. The cooperation between us felt different now. Before tonight, we'd been reacting to events, letting fear drive our decisions. Now we were working together, thinking strategically, supporting each other through the crisis. Mrs. Johnson, I'm going to leave my card under your door, the man called out. I think you'll find my proposal very reasonable. We heard paper sliding across the floor, then footsteps retreating. A few moments later, a car door slammed and an engine started. Harold waited until the sound disappeared before moving to the door. He picked up a business card, reading it carefully before handing it to me. James Morrison, property consultant. I read aloud. Just like in the documents. Patricia shook her head. The audacity of leaving his real name and contact information after everything he's done. He's that confident we won't fight back, David said, and I heard real anger in his voice now. He thinks we're too scared or too powerless to do anything about it. I looked around at my family and friend, seeing something I hadn't seen in months. We weren't cowering anymore. We weren't letting fear make our decisions. We were angry, yes, but it was focused anger, directed at the right target. Well, I said, he's about to learn how wrong he is,